Hello, I'm Ray Pointer. I grew up in Detroit, and during my formative years, I was very privileged to meet the mother of the civil rights movement, Mrs. Rosa Parks, when she would visit my school. And it was through these visits that I came to understand her place in modern American history. In 1974, when I was a student at Wayne State University, I was asked to supervise a film strip on the Rosa Parks story. I had an excellent script by Patricia Villegas, and we arranged for a broadcast over the campus radio station WDET. We had compelling narration by Lillian Genzer and Gloria House, and of course the inspired commentary by Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks' Modern-Day Heroine was the first documentary ever done on this subject, and was to be the first in a series called Heroes and Heroines of Our Age. But due to funding cutbacks and university politics, the series was never completed, and the Rosa Parks project was lost in the process. But now, after 30 years of neglect, I have restored it so that today's audiences can once again experience this moving and dramatic piece told through authentic period photographs. And now, with the 50th anniversary of the Montgomery Bus Boycott with us, I'm proud to present the return of Rosa Parks' Modern-Day Heroine. We begin by asking this basic question: what is heroism?
The dictionary tells us that a hero or heroine is a person of distinguished strength and bravery. It says, too, a hero is the central person taking an admirable part in any remarkable action or event, and is described as someone we can look up to as a model for our lives.
To me, a hero is a person who struggles against great odds.
A hero is a person who strives for something and doesn't give up until he succeeds.
A hero is a person of distinguished moral or physical qualities.
Yes, and a hero is not a person who needs to be comfortable. He or she wants to serve a cause and is willing to take a risk to his or her happiness and life. He or she has the inner strength not to weaken in the face of difficulties. In the past, we have had many military heroes who showed great courage in battle. In recent times, we have to think of our most important heroes and heroines as those who have accomplished a great task committed to goals of peace, justice, and economic welfare while using nonviolent means. Maybe we could say that a hero or a heroine is a person who, by performing one courageous act, can make a beginning to bring forth peace and justice for all human beings. For every right, for every freedom we have today, there was someone who took the first step in an action. In one tiny second, someone showed courage and strength. That is heroism.
It's a long way from the early days in the United States to our time. For instance, what do you do on a weekend vacation? Go to the beach? Stop at a restaurant for ice cream? Or just have a hamburger at a lunch counter? For millions of Black Americans, the right to do even these simple things was denied us for hundreds of years. Black people lived in separate neighborhoods. We could not buy or rent property in white sections of town, even if we could afford to. Black children did not go to school with white children, and black schools were usually not as good. The buildings were old. Books and supplies were lacking. Black people were denied the use of public beaches, resorts, parks, and pools. At the movies, we had a separate section, or we had to sit upstairs. Black people were usually the last people to be hired and the first to be fired. We were not allowed to vote. We were forced to sit in the back of public buses. In short, Black people were not allowed to take full part in American society or government. The separating of people because of skin color is called segregation. It is a form of racial discrimination. Segregation began early in the history of America with slavery in both the North and the South. Soon after our Revolutionary War, the northern portion of our country became more industrial. There were not so many large farms. The North did not need slaves to do all the work. But in the South, owners of large plantations bought and sold other human beings to work for them. Their whole way of life was based on this system. The Civil War in our country over 100 years ago was fought for many reasons. One was the question of slavery. Following this bloody war, the United States Congress passed an amendment to the Constitution giving citizenship to all black people. Not long after this, the Supreme Court said that it was all right to keep black children separated from white children in their schools, as long as the schools were equally good. So our country went along for many years using this excuse of separate but equal. But if things are separate, can they really be equal? If there are two drinking fountains and you're not allowed to drink from one of them, are you equal to the person who is allowed to drink from the other one? If you were black and wanted a hot dog, the lady in the store might sell it to you, but you'd have to go outside to eat it. How would you feel about having to eat outside while others were inside sitting down at the lunch counter eating their hot dogs? If you are riding the bus and you pay the same money as the other person, is it equal if you have to sit in the back or even stand when the seats marked for you are filled up by others? For many years, life for black people in the South was hard, bitter, and hurtful. Many did speak out against segregation. There was a hard struggle. Finally, the matter was taken to court. In the year 1954, there was a Supreme Court with different ideas about education. The Chief Justice was Earl Warren. Under his leadership, this court said that separating children because of skin color was not right. Separate is unequal, they said. The court asked that the states act quickly to end segregation in schools. But most southern states paid little attention. In Montgomery, Alabama, the pattern of segregation did not change. Black children were still in separate schools. Families lived in separate neighborhoods. People had separate places on the buses, separate and unequal, segregated, resisting change. But we know change happened. Who brought about this change? On the 1st of December 1955, a black seamstress refused to give up her bus seat to a white man. The city, Montgomery, Alabama. The seamstress, Rosa Parks. This is her story. The story of how one woman became a heroine, starting alone in one tiny second, gaining support from others who became courageous, and then helping to organize others who wanted to show their bravery too. And finally, through hard work and struggle, bringing about a change. Are heroines and heroes born special? Or does that special spark come later in life? Let's hear about Rosa Parks' childhood as she tells it.
I was born in Tuskegee, Alabama, February 4th, 1913. My mother was a teacher, Leona McCauley. My father was a carpenter, James McCauley. And we lived with my grandparents, and they were in poor health and poor financially. We had to live on a small farm and exist as best we could in these conditions.
Mrs. Parks was born into a segregated society. To understand her story, we must also listen to some of her feelings about segregation.
I had many thoughts about the difference in which we had to live and the white people, and the reason that we seemed to suffer and have less and work hard, while others did not have to go through this oppression. And of course, there were some who were poor, but of course they were in better circumstances than we were.
One woman, a heroine, Mrs. Rosa Parks, had the courage to take a stand. How did she develop this courage to stand alone against this system of segregation?
I had had problems with bus drivers before, especially one would sometimes refuse to permit me to board the bus if I was the only person standing there waiting to shut the bus door and drive right on, because I refused to give them my money and go to the back to get in. And I had seen other people humiliated, and I had seen small children mistreated by bus drivers when they hadn't been brainwashed or hadn't been told that they would have to go to the back, and how the bus driver would speak to them so harshly to make them move out of the seats, and they would be puzzled and hurt. And I had seen women made to stand up by the bus driver for white men to be seated.
And so, on December of 1955, a giant step was taken to end segregation not only in Montgomery, Alabama, but for the South, for all the United States, and for people everywhere. Rosa Parks was tired as she wearily climbed aboard the bus. She had worked long hours sewing in the store downtown. She sat down directly behind the so-called white section. She was obeying the law. When more white passengers came onto the bus, the driver asked Mrs. Parks and 3 other black passengers to get up and let the white passengers sit down. The 3 other black passengers moved as they were told to do. By that time, all the seats in the bus were taken. Mrs. Parks saw that she would have to stand for the long trip home. She looked at the driver and said, "No." It took one tiny second. The driver and other passengers were surprised. They couldn't believe their ears. A black person just couldn't refuse to give her seat to a white person. The driver stopped his bus and called the police. Rosa Parks was arrested. Her trial was set for December 5th.
I was first taken to the city desk and had to give the information, my name and whatever information they asked. I was then taken to the jail. The bus driver first had to say that he wanted a warrant sworn out against me, which he did. And when I went into the jail, my purse and my shopping bag were taken, and I was put in a cell with 2 women. And in a few minutes I had to go down to be fingerprinted and a photograph taken and answer more questions. I was given permission to make 1 telephone call, and I called my home. My husband was there, and I told him what had happened, and he called someone he knew to make the bail for me to be released.
One woman, alone, in an act of courage. But this was only the beginning. The black community of Montgomery soon heard of what Rosa Parks had done. Her courageous act inspired them. 3 leaders in the black community had a plan. The men, E.D. Nixon, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., and Reverend Ralph Abernathy. The plan, a bus boycott. They would ask the people of Montgomery to stop riding buses and paying bus fares until black people could choose their seats in a bus just as white people could, and until Mrs. Parks was freed. A meeting was called for more black leaders. They distributed papers which said, "Don't ride the bus to work, to town, to school, or any place, Monday, December 5th. Another black woman has been arrested and put in jail because she refused to give up her bus seat. Come to a mass meeting Monday at 7 o'clock at the Holt Street Baptist Church for instructions." There were about 40 people at the first meeting: doctors, teachers, maids, businessmen, lawyers, laborers, ministers, waiters, taxi drivers. They decided on a boycott. They said they would not use the city buses. The next day, through more leaflets and a newspaper story, almost all the black people in Montgomery learned of the boycott. the heroic action of Rosa Parks was gaining support.
When I first met Dr. King, he came to be a guest speaker for an NAACP meeting several months before this incident. I was very much impressed with him as a person, his youth and his friendliness and his quiet manner and his eloquence from the platform, because he really had recently come into Montgomery and made a great impression on the community because he'd organized in his church a social action committee. He began to make them concerned and aware of the needs of the community.
Now, how is the boycott going to be successful? Most black workers had no cars of their own. How would they get to work? Well, the black taxi companies helped. There were 210 cabs in Montgomery. The taxi drivers would carry black passengers anywhere for only 10 cents, so people could get to work. On that first Monday, 95% of the regular black riders stayed off the buses. The start of the boycott was a success.
On this Thursday evening, the night of my arrest, when people began to hear about it, the telephone rang most of the night. Friday morning, it was pouring down rain, so I managed to get a taxi cab to give me a ride to work. And those who had heard about it were very much surprised that I would be composed enough to return to work.
Rosa Parks went to trial December 5th. She was found guilty and told to pay $14. She refused to pay and said she would appeal to a higher court. Rosa Parks had lost her case in court, but she hadn't lost her courage, and she hadn't lost her friends. The leaders of the boycott decided to organize a larger boycott group. It was called the Montgomery Improvement Association. Martin Luther King Jr. was elected president. The Montgomery Improvement Association asked the bus company for 3 things. 1, courteous treatment of black passengers. 2, a more flexible color line in seating. And 3, hiring of black drivers for black neighborhoods. But they couldn't reach agreement with the city government or bus company officials. Also, the taxi drivers were finding it hard to continue a 10-cent fare. The police commissioner said that taxis had to charge at least 45 cents per passenger. So black people organized as they hadn't done since Civil War days, since the days of the Underground Railroad. Carpools were set up. Some white employers picked up their black workers. Many black people chose to walk. One woman said proudly, "I'm walking for my children and my grandchildren." What were the other people doing while Rosa Parks' black supporters were organizing and carrying out their freedom boycott? Some were silent. Some of the white people were angry. But many civil rights workers, white and black, became heroes and heroines in the struggle. The bus company was losing money. Montgomery's mayor was worried, too. He made a speech on television asking white people to stop driving their workers to and from work. The carpool drivers were being stopped by police. They were arrested and jailed for minor traffic violations. Martin Luther King Jr., Ralph Abernathy, and other leaders of the boycott received many threats. Bombs were exploded. Angry crowds of people armed themselves. Martin Luther King Jr. pleaded for nonviolence and peace, and black people followed his wishes. The boycott was working. Downtown stores lost $1 million worth of sales. The bus company had depended on blacks for 3/4 of their business. Since the bus line wasn't paying its $200,000 in taxes, the city was beginning to hurt. The mayor was worried. It was at this time that the Montgomery Improvement Association changed its goals. It was decided that the boycott, started when Rosa Parks acted alone, would fight the whole idea of segregation on buses everywhere. The Montgomery Improvement Association asked the court for equal rights which are guaranteed by our Constitution. On June 4, 1956, the judges ruled that bus segregation was against the law. City officials appealed this decision, but a higher court agreed bus segregation was against the law. It was a victory. The Montgomery Bus Boycott was over on December 20, 1956. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Mr. Glenn Smiley rode together on a Montgomery bus. How does it feel to be a heroine? Rosa Parks must know.
Because of the Montgomery story and the demonstration of unity among our people in other parts of the South where there was segregation, the walls of segregation crumbled to such an extent that today the South is not even like it was at the time I lived there.
We have seen and heard the story of a black American heroine, a seamstress, a worker, a quiet woman, who in one tiny second made a decision to act against injustice, an act of great bravery. She gave courage to others, for family, friends, and fellow human beings to sacrifice, to share hardship, to work for dignity and respect. Many people work together to bring about this historic change in the way of life for millions of people, for me and for you. But this story is not ended. The struggle for human betterment continues. Will you play a part in it?